Good evening everyone, welcome to an Aussie Cyclone Chasers update. Tonight, the 26th of November 2013. Tonight we'll talk about Ex Alessia and what she's doing over the next couple of days, and also talking about the general tropics and a new trough system pushing through Northern Australia. Finally, we'll take a look at the MJO and what we can expect rainfall wise. Let's get into it. So taking a look at the satellite imagery, thanks to weatherzone.com.au, we can see that there's a lot of activity still over Indonesia and East Timor. So we haven't got too much dry air penetrating through there. There is a lot of dry air here over the Pilbara, the Kimberley. However, that's not extending northwards here. There are no actual depressions in here though, so there's nothing that we're actually looking at. It's just general thunderstorm activity. As we head towards the top end, we see that once again that Darwin area remaining fairly clear of storm activity. There's a nice little tongue of dry air just off the coast and then pushing in over the top end. And east of that tongue, though, there is some very warm, very moist air associated with the monsoon trough, and we can see some excellent thunderstorm activity over most of the top end region, most of the Arnhem Land, getting down towards the VRD. As we go to the eastern parts of the top end, we can see that thunderstorm activity intensifying or becoming more general, and we see it stronger as well, and we see some fairly good rainfall totals coming out from this part of the world over the past 24 hours. Now also, if we look towards the Gulf country, we have ex-tropical cyclone Alessia, which is now pushed offshore. It pushed over Aliangula, and I'll show you the radar imagery from earlier today, and it's now over the open ocean, but it's very, very poorly structured at the moment. So it will be very interesting to see tonight, in fact, how it reacts to the diurnal maximum of convection. So what happens overnight on the water is that we tend to see an increase in convective activity, so an increase in this thunderstorm activity. So it'll be very interesting because there's already a lot of thunderstorms around it to see if they consolidate it all overnight. Now, also we see more rain and storm activities over the far northern parts of Queensland in this really, really moist northwest to northeasterly flow. It's very much a lot of convergence going on in this area. We get these northwest, northeasterlies, and where they meet, we see all hell breaking loose. And so we've got a lot of storm activity there, a lot of rain activity. Unfortunately, there's not too many gauges here, so we don't have a very good idea at how much rain is falling. But you can just see through the satellite imagery that there's got to be a lot of rain falling out of this stuff. So also the Coral Sea, we see a fair bit of wind shear out here in the southern and central Coral Sea. A lot of storm activity developing between PNG, Solomon Islands. Once again, no recognised low pressure area. There is still that eddy we're expecting to develop off the coast of Cairns, and this could be the start. This storm activity pushing offshore could be the start of that. But once again, this is not expected to develop into anything more than an eddy. We have a lot of dry air pushing up here northwards in the Coral Sea, so don't stress about this one at all. None of the models are picking this up to do anything more than just being a little monsoonal eddy. Looking at the last few hours, once again radar imagery courtesy of WeatherZone, we see that there's a lot of rotation, but it's generally broad rotation here. Now it started over Aliangula earlier today, and it's now dropping down to the southeast or south-southeast, but it's really, really very, very loose, and it really looks ugly in terms of any structure. So look, it's gonna have a lot of work to do if it wants to redevelop into a cyclone anytime soon. So it is still there, and it is still a low pressure region. It is still a low pressure area. It will be called Alessia if it redevelops, but it's got a long way to go to redevelop, and that's why I'm very interested tonight to see whether overnight this convection can start to develop over a central area. At the moment, what we do is we've got a lot of convection. We've got a lot of convection out in the periphery of the system. So we've got a lot of convection out here. We've got a lot of convection out here. There's more to the north where you're not seeing in your screen. But the actual low is somewhere in this area here, and so there's very little convection over the low itself. So at the moment it's just being overtaken by all this other peripheral convection that's not really banding in or spiraling into a central point. So until we start to see some of that convection consolidating around this circled area here, we're not going to see this thing intensify anytime soon. However, nighttime is the prime time that this can happen, but we really need to see this convection really start to bubble away near the middle of the system. if anything is to happen. So a bit of high resolution imagery thanks to the Weather Underground. We can see the GFS model is predicting a very, very similar location to where we were circling just before of the low pressure center here to the southeast of Groote Eylandt, of Alliangula, and we see that the European model is also on board, but a little bit further to the south. So the Euro has probably analysed this system just a little bit south of where it should have, but it's not far enough for us to go, no, this model is completely inaccurate. So as we head towards tomorrow morning, Queensland time, so 10 o'clock Queensland time, let's have a look what it does. We see that it continues to push in a more southerly direction, and it pushes really close to the coast, but we do start to see a ramping up here of some winds of 20 to 25, even up to 30 knots on its southeastern quadrant. Now, what we do down south, we've got a high building up, and so what it's creating is a pressure gradient force between the center of the system and the high building down south, and so what we've got is we've got a pressure squeeze, so we've got tightly packed isobars, and we've got fairly strong winds coming on the southern edge of it. Even the northern edge, though, it's attached to a fairly decent monsoon, so even the north is producing 15 to 20 knots. So look, if the thing can tighten up, it's not going to take too much more to get this thing actually developing into something significant. It needs to stay in the water, though, and the Euro model is suggesting it's not going to be able to do that. The Euro model has it pushing back onto the coast very, very quickly. The GFS model, in comparison, does have the system remaining out over the water for a lot longer, so it has it basically over the Alliangula area again tomorrow, and you can start to see even the GFS is picking up that same pressure gradient squeeze here to the south of the low, where we're going to see the GFS model predicting gales by tomorrow. It seems a little ambitious, but we can't completely rule it out, especially depending, once again, remember what I said to you earlier, it does depend on how the system reacts to that diurnal maximum of convection overnight, and whether that convection can consolidate under the low-level circulation centre. So if we then take a look at the 48-hour mark, so looking at Thursday morning at 10 a.m. Queensland time, the European model is just completely gone. It's pushed it way west and back inland over the Northern Territory. So obviously any chance it has of redeveloping into anything significant whatsoever is gone if that situation happens. The GFS model, though, it does keep it back over the water, and so the GFS model continues to reform this into a tropical cyclone in an almost stationary position over the southwestern Gulf. Once again, and I say this in every one of my videos, the GFS model overcooks the potential for tropical cyclogenesis in a situation where we're looking at tropical convection. The GFS wants to spin it up rapidly, okay, and that's just part of the way the GFS model works, unfortunately, that it does tend to spin up a lot of cyclones that don't actually happen. The GFS model is an excellent model once a cyclone has formed and once we've got that low-level circulation center embedded and deep. It's a great model then. But until that happens, the model does overcook things, and so do take this one with caution. So the EC model probably analysing the system a little bit too far to the south, the GFS model wanting to intensify it a little too quickly based on current conditions. So somewhere in between these two models, I think, is where we're going to see the real world scenario play out, where the system will push more in a southerly and then westerly direction, maybe not as quickly as the European has it doing so. And maybe a little stronger than the European is suggesting as well. So we're talking getting up to a fairly decent low pressure system or a very, very weak Cat 1 before it pushes back over land in the Northern Territory. Alright, let's have a look at what are the steering influences of this particular system, and even though the models at the surface vary greatly, we'll see that over the course of the actual steering flow that the models are expecting is actually very similar between the GFS and the European. Just also for your own information, the Canadian model has this system pushing in a southeast or southerly direction and washing out over the far northwestern parts of Queensland. That doesn't seem like a likely scenario, especially given the steering factors that are about to be in play. The Bureau of Meteorology's access model pushes the system out to the west, back over the Northern Territory, but does not develop it into a low at all. It sort of just has it as a broad circulation, just like what we're seeing now on radar, and just pushes that broad circulation back to the west. So the access model doesn't not develop this at all. So that's just some other modelling, just in case you think we're only this high pressure system building in over central Australia. Now that high pressure system is going to halt the progression of the system out to the southeast. Now it hasn't completely halted it because the monsoonal flow here is stronger than the high pressure ridge building in underneath. So the monsoon flow, if you like, has a longer arrow because it's stronger than the high pressure ridge that's building in underneath, which has a shorter arrow. So if you think about it in terms of these arrows fight each other out, and the longer arrow being the stronger winds coming from the north is still going to guide this system for another few hours yet. Now what's going to happen though is the monsoonal flow to the north will weaken, the high pressure ridge building to the south will build stronger, and we'll start to see the arrow from the south of the system get longer, and therefore the battle of the arrows south of the low pressure centre will win out and it will push back to the west. Let's see how that progresses. So this is how it's progressing tonight. And you can see that the colouring is starting to become similar both on the north and the south. And look at tomorrow morning. By tomorrow morning, we start to see that, in fact, this is now becoming our dominant steering flow, and this is becoming our weaker steering flow. So this arrow starts to win out because the steering flow from the north starts to weaken, and so therefore the system will start to push in a more southwest or west direction from where it is there in the southern Gulf starting tomorrow. Now there is a little bit of divergence there, and I showed you between the model guidance where one of the models is still tipping that northerly influence to be quite large, and so you've got the centre now located in a quasi-stationary position according to the GFS model, where we've got a northwesterly and a northwesterly wind coming through here and an easterly wind coming through here, and really they're fighting it out and no one's winning, and the cyclone or the low remains fairly well perched in the southwestern Gulf with no chance of moving anywhere for that time being. However, once again, that changes in the longer term. So it's an interesting little battle between the ridge and the monsoonal northwesterlies over the next 24 hours before the ridge wins out and eventually starts to push the system back to the west. Now, in the longer term, if we head to Friday, and we're going to see this upper level trough. You can see the upper level trough here. Okay, we're going to see that upper level trough start to amplify northwards on Friday, but probably not far enough northwards to capture the cyclone and push it inland over Queensland. But there is still an element of doubt here on Friday morning's forecast as to whether this trough system can amplify, which means move far enough northwards to just capture the system and bring it down to the southeast. At this stage it appears very unlikely, but stranger things can happen, and sometimes model guidance, especially for the upper levels, isn't as clear cut as it is for the surface levels, and things can change. Now, if this doesn't happen, so if this trough does not capture the cyclone or the low, which is what we expect to happen, we expect it not to be able to do that, we then expect to see another high pressure ridge building in underneath, and the system will then track west indefinitely for a fair way, if it remains alive, of course. So as we head through the time frame, let's have a look at how the trough doesn't capture it. You can see it got very close. It got very, very close, and it just pushes into the south, and then the system is underneath another ridge and then starts to push out to the west. So this is our new ridge building, and the system then pushes to the west. So there's still a little bit of doubt there coming up to Friday, and to see just how strong this upper level trough will be. At this stage, as I say, the favoured scenario, according to all the model guidance, is that the system will escape the clutches of the trough, and the ridge building in behind the trough will continue to push the system back to the west. Alright folks, so that's the latest on Alessia. If we take a look at the Queensland eddy, really it's not even worth talking about, but I know some Queenslanders are always keen to see any little perturbation in the monsoonal flow or in the monsoonal trough, so we will just mention it briefly. Here it is at 24 hours tomorrow morning. It really is just really part of the trough system and just a very weak little thing here. And in 2 days' time, it really doesn't do anything. It pushes north along with the monsoon trough and really does not form into anything more significant than that. And if we look at why that might happen, we see that in terms of wind shear, it shouldn't be too bad up this part of the world, and it's not, but we see a lot of shear pushing north over the Coral Sea over the next couple of days. And if we look at humidity values out here where the eddy is are very, very dry. You can see this purple patch here looking at 30% humidity in the mid-levels of the atmosphere. No chance in hell of anything developing out here, really. From a meteorological perspective, no chance at all of anything happening out here. So, unfortunately for Queenslanders, you're going to have to wait a bit longer for a decent low pressure system, which is quite normal for this time of year. We don't expect them in anyway. All right, let's have a quick look at the rainfall over the next 4 days. And yippee, the MJO is on its way back. Overall modelling is suggesting it's going to be revived somewhere in the Indian Ocean. Once probably tropical cyclone Lahar hits India, we'll start to see a bit more of a cross-equatorial westerly flow developing, and so we'll see that the Indian Ocean should kick off the MJO again towards the early part of December. It should start to push into our region of the continent in the middle part of December. So at one stage last week we were a bit worried because there was no sign of the MJO getting back. So at this stage, this is a much more positive impact for our wet season come mid-December. So according to this, we would see cyclone potential increase in the off the waters of Western Australia around about early December, and then over the Australian continent, and then eventually over the Coral Sea towards middle to late December. So that's what we would expect according to the MJO guidance we currently have available to us. Tomorrow's rainfall, we see that we have a lot of rain over the Gulf, pretty obvious why, and we also see a fair bit of rainfall, a good rainfall signature on the ECMWF Extreme Forecast Index over the central parts of the peninsula too, so it looks like there's going to be a fair bit of good rain over there, and also possibly some shower and storm activity through other parts of Queensland, shower and storm activity through inland Northern Territory. Starting to see a little bit more activity out here onto the western top end again as that dry air retreats. On Thursday, we continue to see that low or cyclone is going to stay in that southwestern or southern Gulf, more likely the southwestern Gulf. Some modelling has it pushing back to the west, so therefore we'll see, if that happens, we'll see an increase in rainfall over the central parts of Northern Territory. And also that northwestern tip, if that low does start to push west, we'll start to get a moist onshore west-northwest to northwest flow, and that'll bring in a fair bit of rain and storm activity as you would expect in a monsoon. We also see, interestingly, on the European Extreme Forecast Index, we also see a chance here for some heavier rain over the North Tropical Coast region on the Thursday. On Friday, we continue to see heavy rain in the Gulf. Once again, the forecast is starting to get variable though here because some of the modelling is tipping that low to already be over the central top end. Some of the modelling continues, like the GFS and the Canadian, to have the cyclone now over here. And pushing in a lot of rainfall here. Now, the other thing on Friday is we see an inland trough develop and an upper trough develop over Queensland. Remember, it's that same upper trough that we're wondering may or may not capture the system at this stage. We think it's not going to, but there is still that opportunity and potential for it to do so if the upper trough develops a little bit stronger than expected. On Saturday, we see that upper trough moving eastwards. We see good moisture feed into northern Queensland, so we see some good rainfall potential there. Also some rainfall potential over southeast Queensland, northeast New South Wales, with some very strong thunderstorms possible on the Saturday. Total forecast rainfall over the next 4 days, huge amounts over the Gulf, pretty good amounts over the peninsula, petering out as we head down south towards the south of the Queensland coast. We see that good upper level trough here producing some decent falls or some decent thunderstorm activity over inland Queensland on the Friday/Saturday. As we go to the next 4 days after that, the forecast is extremely varied, so we're not going to talk too much about that forecast. Once again, there is still a lot of variability in model guidance as to what that low pressure system does and where it goes and how much rain will be associated with what's left of the monsoon. There's too much variability at the moment, so we're not going to talk about that. But have a look at your region there if you're just interested in it. And over the 8 days, once again, forecast is low confidence over the 4 to 8 day period. So once again, take it with a grain of salt, but have a look at those maps and see your region by pausing this video. Thanks very much for watching tonight, and we'll talk to you again tomorrow night.